This next section of the merger training concerns efforts underway to streamline the project development process. In this module, we'll cover 1. Background on the initiative to improve the project development process. 2. Next, we'll focus on the project scoping process. Scoping is one of the key elements involved in improving the project development process. 3. We'll wrap up this section by reviewing the plans for implementing the Streamlining initiative. It is important to note that the material and concepts covered in this module can apply to the entire project development process, not just the merger process. Meaning, the concepts discussed under Streamlining apply to all types of projects, whether they are following the merger process or not. In fact, the use of scoping should help you determine if the project should use the merger process. Let's start by looking at why it was decided to improve the project development process. The Interagency Leadership Team, or ILT, is composed of deputy secretaries from 11 state and federal agencies. This team has a number of goals, one of which is to improve the merger process. They established this goal not because merger is working poorly, but because the ILT wants to continually improve it and build on the positive benefits that the merger process has provided. In reality, this ILT goal is more about improving the transportation project development and delivery process, with merger being one aspect. The Streamlining initiative addressed in this training module is obviously covered by this ILT goal, but it is important to understand that Streamlining also involves and depends on the ILT's other two goals, integration and GIS. The integration goal deals with better integrating long-range transportation planning and the project development process. This means that during the project development process, we want to make better use of the information, data, and decisions that are created during the long-range transportation planning process. The GIS goal deals with enhancing the use of digital-based data, especially using digital-based data to make decisions early without extensive fieldwork. The ILT has done a lot of work on all three of these goals. Specifically, with regards to the Improve Merger goal, the ILT has accomplished many things. For instance, they have sponsored the establishment of Merger Process Roles and Responsibilities, the Merger Conflict or Dispute Resolution Process, the Merger Process Training, Merger Process Performance Measures. This last item, Merger Process Performance Measures, contains indicators that reflect the efficiency of the merger process and the impact of the merger process decisions on the human and natural environment. The ILT uses these measures to see how well the merger process is operating. Let's take a look at an example of an actual merger metric that the ILT reviews. This metric shows the average time in months that it took to complete one concurrence point and progress to the next concurrence point. The data reflects performance for new location projects worked on during the years 2001 to 2008. However, subsequent measurements have not shown substantial drops in time. Specifically, the data represented by the first bar on the left of the chart says that on average it took 25 months to start a project, scope it, and then get concurrence on purpose and need, which is concurrence point 1. Looking at the next bar, it shows that it took on average 20 months to go from getting concurrence on purpose and need to getting concurrence on alternative corridors to study in detail, which is concurrence point 2. When the ILT reviewed this data in 2008, it really begged the question, why does it take so long, especially at the beginning of the process? What is going on between all of these concurrence points? From this assessment, the ILT saw a definite opportunity for improvement, especially concerning the beginning of the process. About the same time period, there were other factors percolating that also pointed to the opportunity to improve project development. Let's look at those other factors. This slide outlines some other factors that pointed to the need to formally assess and improve the project development process. First, during September 2008, representatives from NCDOT and the FHWA North Carolina Division met for a multi-day joint strategic planning session. The objective of the session was to identify priority initiatives that would meet goals which were important to both organizations. The intention was that both agencies would work together to address the identified priorities. One of the priorities identified at the session was the need to improve the efficiency of the project development process. This need was specifically identified by personnel from NCDOT's Project Development and Environmental Analysis Unit and FHWA personnel who work in project development and in the merger process. Second, the time required to develop and deliver transportation projects has been a topic of state and federal interest. The North Carolina General Assembly has sponsored a number of studies and inquiries which have focused on the time it takes NCDOT to develop and deliver projects. The nature of these studies has been to capture the opportunity to reduce the time and make project development and delivery more efficient. Likewise, the U.S. Congress has also recognized the need to improve efficiency by including numerous streamlining provisions in the Safety Lou Transportation Act of 2005, as well as the newest Transportation Act, MAP 21, which stands for Moving Ahead for Progress in the 21st Century. Note, some specific studies ordered by the General Assembly were the NCDOT Project Delivery Study of July 19, 2004 by the DI Management Group and the NCDOT Project Delivery Improvement Recommendations from PBS&J on July 4, 2007. Finally, we are all aware of the financial and budgetary challenges that have plagued our state and federal governments. There is great emphasis on reducing budgets and reduced funding and resources for programs. Many times when we are in belt-tightening mode, the mindset seems to be that organizations just have to accomplish more work with less resources or staff. This attitude and approach is short-sighted and has many pitfalls. Rather than follow that path, it has been recognized that instead we need to find wiser and more efficient and effective ways to use limited resources. We need to ensure that our limited resources are spent in the activities that truly add value. It's about working smarter, not necessarily harder. So, in late 2008, all of these factors culminated into a decision. Leadership at NCDOT and the FHWA North Carolina Division chartered a team to focus on identifying additional ways to improve the project development process. The initial streamlining team consisted of personnel from NCDOT Long Range Planning, PDEA, Design, Divisions, and FHWA. They were tasked with finding ways to improve the entire project development process. The scope of the effort specifically ranged from the very start of the project development process to right-of-way acquisition. But the team was asked to look especially hard at the early parts of the process leading up to selection of the preferred alternative, concurrence point 3, because this is where the predominant amount of time is expended. The team was asked to focus their efforts on projects that, due to scope and complexity, warrant an EA or EIS environmental document. The team specifically thought about new location projects as they identified and created potential process changes. This effort started with just NCDOT and FHWA because they wanted to make sure that they gave a fair assessment of their own organizations and internal procedures and thought about ways to change or improve internally in addition to changes that would affect our agency partners. The resource agencies, however, have been involved. While FHWA and NCDOT leadership directly sponsored the streamlining team, the ILT also supports this effort. They have provided staff members to help work on it, and they are regularly updated on progress. Specifically, personnel from the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, and North Carolina Department of Natural Environment and Resources joined NCDOT personnel and drafted many of the products, tools, and guidance that will be used in the improved scoping approach. Now, let's take a look at the specific improvement concepts that the streamlining team identified. The streamlining team recognized that much time in the project development process is spent collecting data and analyzing data, answering questions, and addressing issues. The team also recognized that the process is done in a very sequential approach, and that the same amount of effort seems to be given across projects and topics without too much regard for the relative importance and significance of particular project issues. The team also recognized that it can be challenging to establish and maintain a sense of momentum for a project. Based on this assessment, the Streamlining team developed these streamlining concepts. 1. Use data from long-range planning. This concept relates specifically to the ILT's goal to integrate long-range planning and project development. The idea is to make better use of information collected during long-range planning to inform, shape, support, and replace project development information needs. There should be data and information from long-range planning that should help start the project's development so that we don't have to collect or reinvent information. The long-range planning information could also give immense credence for the project and its need. This information should help project development personnel understand the transportation problem and its context. From long-range planning, we should be able to get important information about the transportation problem or need, potential alternatives, public sentiment, the community impacts, and the indirect and cumulative effects. 2. Use as much existing data as possible. This concept relates to the ILT's GIS goal. But we are not only talking about using GIS, we are saying we should only generate or collect data that is truly needed to evaluate and analyze the project based on the project's significant issues. We found that we often collect data that is extraneous to the project issues. That is time and effort not well spent. We have to be aware of the problem we are trying to solve and determine the data that is really needed for that. This concept is also about recognizing the level of detail and accuracy needed for a balanced and fair project study. We spend time and effort getting data to the 100th decimal place when it isn't necessary or helpful. So when data is requested during the project development process, we need to deliberately ask, what exactly are we requesting? How will that data help us? How will we use it? How accurate does it need to be? Do we have any existing data that will be sufficient? 3. Improve scoping. Scoping helps us learn about the potential transportation project and identify the significant project issues. Scoping helps us identify, plan, and schedule the next steps in the project study. It is very important to involve long-range planning personnel and agency personnel in the scoping process, so it is important to do a good job with scoping. We'll talk about scoping in more detail later in this module. 4. Reduce surveys and design. Currently, we do surveys and field delineations on all alternatives carried forward for detailed study. Also, we have been developing designs at a fairly high level of detail for all alternatives studied. We're not proposing to stop field delineations and surveys altogether, but rather only do those activities when necessary because data is lacking. Also, we'd like to reduce the level of effort on the design work. The key is to conscientiously determine the appropriate level of design information that is needed at particular points in the process, and determine the appropriate level of effort to invest in the design work. 5. Finally, we need to strategize the level of effort and approaches based on the project's key issues. Every project is different, so the development of a project should depend heavily on the nature of the specific project issues and the associated risks. Those issues should drive what work is done and what level of effort is given. A sense of momentum needs to be established and maintained by strategizing how project work can be expedited. While the merger process provides a linear framework, it is flexible and allows for the project development process to be tailored to meet the needs of the individual project. It is perfectly acceptable to perform work concurrently, and we should maximize this flexibility. These concepts can be applied to any project. In fact, every project can get a good start by doing effective scoping. Let's turn our attention now to project scoping. The scoping concepts are a great framework for directing our thinking as we begin a project. But what do they look like in practice? There are 2 items to keep in mind as we talk about practical application. Scoping is a process. We will talk about the process in terms of 2 large meetings, but realize it is about effective communication. The scoping process cannot be defined by discrete steps that we will follow and use on every project. However, we will outline basic objectives of scoping in order to guide your efforts. Let's start by defining what scoping is. The Council on Environmental Quality, or CEQ, was responsible for writing the regulations on how to implement the National Environmental Policy Act, NEPA. In these regulations, they define scoping in some detail. However, two main statements provide an excellent synopsis of the intent of scoping. Scoping is intended to be an early and open process for determining the scope of issues to be addressed and for identifying significant issues related to a proposed action. Additionally, this process should identify and eliminate from detailed study the issues which are not significant or that were covered under a previous environmental review. In other words, the goal of scoping is to define what issues will drive the solution to the problem you are trying to solve and what issues require less energy and effort. So our efforts to streamline our approach to scoping is right in line with current regulations. NCDOT's scoping process contains two critical phases. The internal scoping phase, defined as the activities that transportation personnel undertake to transfer information from long-range planning, the integration component, understand the problem we are trying to solve, and the existing context of the area. The participants are from the various NCDOT business units, including the Transportation Planning Branch, FHWA, and long-range planners and local planners such as the MPOs and RPOs. The MPO-RPO staff's participation is critical and represents an enhancement to the process. The external scoping phase, defined as the activities that transportation personnel engage in with external partners. Again, the intent is to orient these external partners to the problem we are trying to solve, but also to obtain their input on existing human and natural resources, as well as discuss their concerns regarding the project. The participants include the pertinent NCDOT staff, MPO-RPO staff, and the appropriate external partners, such as the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, and several departments within the NC Department of Environment and Natural Resources. Often, these activities are handled in large team meetings, and it can be easy to define scoping as simply 2 meetings. But the actual approach and activities will depend on the project. In reality, the scoping process is made up of multiple meetings, conversations, and communications. It is about doing the right coordination for the project. So let's take a closer look at the internal scoping phase. Both the internal and external scoping activities have 5 main objectives. Understand the problem we are trying to solve. It's so easy to jump straight to discussing solutions without fully understanding the problem. Understand the resources within the area. This information is vital to the next objective, which is to identify project issues and constraints. Once the project team has a full understanding of the problem and the project context, they can begin to discuss potential ideas for solutions. While long-range planning does provide a recommended pre-NEPA alternative, it should be considered a starting point, not the only available solution. NCDOT's Project Development and Environmental Analysis Unit initiates the scoping process by contacting the Transportation Planning Branch Project Planning Engineer to determine what project data is available from long-range planning. Additional strategic discussions with the division engineer and/or division construction engineer and the MPO-RPO contact or contacts will help to determine the flow of the internal scoping meeting, who should attend, and where it will be held. They will each have a role in presenting the existing information if a formal meeting is scheduled. Meetings can be at a central location, such as Raleigh, in a conference room, or it can be scheduled on-site or at the division office when merited. The Padilla Project Development Engineer will schedule the meeting and prepare a packet of information that will be distributed electronically. All of the meeting invitations will be sent electronically as well. Each attendee will be asked to bring any known data about the project area they have readily at their fingertips. This also includes their experiences in the area from past projects. If there is no data, then this aspect of the project is important to know, as it may affect the schedule and next steps. The Padilla project development engineer will also prepare an agenda and send it out in advance. At the meeting, the discussion will center around the problem we are trying to solve and whether the existing data adequately supports the purpose and need for the project, the issues that will potentially drive the final solution to the problem, what data gaps do we have, what additional data is required, and the level of accuracy that is needed, what solutions were studied in long-range planning and additional ideas for solutions, whether the project might be placed in the merger process, and the class of action, in other words, the type of planning document, CE, EA, EIS. The outcomes of the meeting include, but are not limited to, a status on the purpose and need for the project. Is it well supported? Do we need additional data? If additional information is required, what level of accuracy is needed? Does the prioritization of the project need to be reassessed? Key issues identified based on existing data. A coordination plan moving forward, merger status and further screening needs, realistic project schedule with opportunities to streamline identified. Most importantly, the next steps, the staff responsible for the steps, and completion deadlines. Throughout scoping, ask critical questions, such as, what is the problem we are trying to solve? This applies not only to the overall problem, but small, intermediate issues and questions that arise. What data and coordination are needed to solve the problem? What level of accuracy does the data need to be? Who should be involved? What is the risk of moving forward while resolving the problem? The outcome shapes the coordination effort with our external partners. Let's move on and discuss what some of these coordination efforts might be. External scoping has the same objectives as internal scoping. They are repeated here in the center box. External scoping activities can range from a formal meeting with the project team to phone discussions with a few external partners. The activities could involve both a team meeting and individual discussions. The approach will be dictated by the outcomes of the internal scoping phase. It should be noted that for transportation personnel involved in both phases of scoping, this phase will be somewhat repetitious since our external partners will need to be brought up to speed on the project. If an external scoping meeting is needed, the Padilla project development engineer will schedule the meeting, preferably on an interagency meeting day, and send out updated project data along with the meeting invitation. Transportation personnel will receive the meeting notification and project data electronically. External partners will receive the meeting invitation electronically and either receive a hard copy of the project data or receive the data electronically based on their needs. At the meeting, the team will be oriented to the problem and the natural and human environment resources based on data from long-range planning and GIS-level mapping. Many of the same topics will be discussed. What are the significant issues? Do we have sound supporting data for purpose and need? What are our data gaps and how should we address these? What are some potential solutions and how should we proceed? The difference is the perspective, concerns, and questions our external partners bring to the table. The tone of external scoping activities should be relaxed, non-confrontational, fact-finding, and create an atmosphere of brainstorming without the pressure to sign a concurrence form. External team members are expected to study the project data, note potential issues and concerns, and research the information they have readily available without extensive effort. Everyone attending the meeting will be expected to take an active role in the meeting and be prepared. The outcomes from the meeting will be project-dependent, but hopefully will have a good start on identifying the significant issues, what data gaps need to be filled, whether the project is in or out of merger, and most importantly, a sound approach to the project and what are the next steps. There are occasions where NCDOT would like to seek concurrence on purpose and need during these external scoping activities. When NCDOT feels that the purpose and need is sound and that the project will be in the merger process, they can opt to have a combined scoping concurrence point 1 meeting. However, all team members will be alerted in advance of the combined meeting, and NCDOT will coordinate with the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers in advance, since the Corps' role changes for the meeting. The important message regarding everyone's role during scoping is be prepared. Study the existing data set and work to have your questions and concerns identified before the meeting. If there are questions on the packet of information, call the PDEA Project Development Engineer before the meeting and coordinate. This will help to make the meeting more effective and efficient. We felt that this approach to scoping should be tested, so we picked 3 pilot projects that were in the beginning stages, trained the team members on the process, and then assessed how the process worked through external scoping. These pilot projects had tremendous success and gave us many lessons learned. Some of the successes included reducing a project's scope. There were 3 phases, and 1 phase was eliminated after discussions at the internal scoping meeting. Reducing project timeline by combining several concurrence points so that we have 2 meetings instead of 5. Vetting and clarified the purpose and need on one project to verify whether it still had merit and independent utility. The lessons learned were, a sound meeting agenda is a must. Make sure everyone understands their role. Good facilitation was crucial to making sure the meeting is conducted in a manner that promotes discussion. Control the number of participants at the meeting or meetings, especially an external scoping meeting. Too many attendees reduces the chance that honest and open discussion will occur. Because of the success of the pilot projects, NCDOT has decided to implement this revised approach to scoping on all rural, urban, interstate, and widening projects that are managed by the central NCDOT offices in Raleigh. This process will be implemented in a methodical and sensible way. NCDOT identified projects that were due to start up in 2012 and then worked with each of the PDEA project development engineers to train and use the process. Basically, we conducted small group training and coaching sessions. However, going forward, additional whole-scale training is needed in order to train our external partners that we work with on a regular basis. This process is not perfect. It is really about making a culture change. It is imperative that we stay engaged with each other around how it is working. We need to hear about issues, questions, mistakes, successes. We need to monitor how it is going and do course corrections as needed. This concludes the modules for providing an overview of the merger process. These last few slides are final thoughts concluding our discussions on the merger process. The merger process was developed in accordance with regulatory guidelines such as those set forth under the National Environmental Policy Act and the Clean Water Act. It provides a process that allows a project to move forward methodically in a manner that avoids confusion and frustration. Although the merger process has structure, it is a flexible process, so don't hesitate to apply common sense. As discussed, members of the merger team are empowered and expected to make decisions that move a project forward. The merger process is a solutions-oriented process, so collaboration and cooperation is also expected. Based on data collected over the past several years, the merger process is working well. Over 275 projects have moved through the process in one way or another. Most concurrence points are reached with only 1 meeting, and virtually all in 2 meetings. The need for 3 or more meetings to achieve a concurrence point is extremely rare. There have been a number of projects that have gone into the conflict dispute resolution process, but most have moved forward following discussions among the project managers, the first steps of the process. Only a very few projects have been elevated to the higher levels.